good articles and even just research on this in regard to how often, and I mean, I feel like almost every single time, specifically the US government grabs the microphone the moment that something happens to start setting the narrative. And it's a no-brainer to realize there's no way they could possibly know without investigation unless they've got, some special intelligence, which is what they always hope you think. But every time, just like with COVID-19, just like with every other event, like you're saying, how would the news possibly know that right in that moment? Because there's some entity driving the agenda to get that narrative set in minds before anybody else has the opportunity to bring anything to the table.
Yes,
That's what we're seeing here.
exactly. Or before there can be any investigation. So if there's a big cyber attack, we could assume any sort of attack takes time to investigate, but they don't want time to investigate it, Anyway, this is probably the most outrageous of all because it just shows, in my opinion, what the CTI League is really about. Okay, so Clear Sky and Zadenberg's claims regarding Iran only intensified after the CTI League was founded, with Clear Sky and Zadenberg being the only source for the claim made earlier this year in May that Iran had been responsible for hacking Gilead. You guys remember that story? That Gilead had been hacked by Iran? Yeah, so that was these guys. And at the time, oh, by the way, the hack, that was like, oh, scary, they're hacking our COVID cures. The hack was a single fake email login page designed to steal passwords, and no one clicked on it.
So a phishing email. Cool.
Yeah, but no one clicked on it. Like, no one even knows. Anyway, Clear Sky, all of this, the first outlet report on this hack was Reuters. And Clear Sky was the only people in Zadenberg, the only people that Reuters article cites, go and look at it. And then Clear Sky claimed, well, we're the ones that foiled the Gilead hack. Yep. And remember that group I mentioned earlier that CTI League has been working with since they were founded, and they're helping protect? Gilead is part of that and has been partnered with Zadenberg CTI League weeks prior to the alleged hack. So CTI League was there. Anyone can join CTI League as long as Ohad Zadenberg says, come on in, and we don't have to know who they are, but they can be all up in our hospitals and all up in the pharmaceutical companies, and I guess now nuclear reactors and chemical plants. And
I love the idea that you can be like, oh, this thing happened, but we stopped it. Don't worry about anything else. It's all, we already saved you. It's just this idea that they can, and this ties in with a lot of the other things we always point out, this kind of like preemptive, where they just kind of claim something happened and just jump right to the part where they claim that they took action, as opposed to proving that it happened in the first place. That's so relevant to so many discussions today.
So I misspoke, I guess, because like I said, I wrote this article in March. So Zadenberg is the only person they cite by name in the Reuters article. Reuters also cites two other but anonymous cybersecurity researchers. They don't say who they work for.
Same difference.
So it could be anyone, or they could work for Clear Sky.
Or they could not exist, right? I mean, that's...
Perhaps, indeed. Who knows? But check out how Zadenberg knew that it was Iran. The web domains and hosting servers used in the hacking attempts were linked to Iran. How were they linked to Iran, Zadenberg? Care to say? Oh, I guess not.
Yeah. You know what that reminds me of?
It's a high probability it's bullshit.
Yeah, definitely. You know what that reminds me of in regard to the email thing? Remember the whole Russiagate, and it boiled down to the fact that Podesta himself had been the victim of a phishing email, like your grandfather might, right? And that's ultimately, and they just kind of continue this whole argument that it was a Russian hack. Not to get bogged down in the Seth Rich and that discussion and all that. That's obviously not the case, but it's so interesting how it's the same kind of thing. We're talking about something that's basic, that everybody gets. And just because and first of all, just because something may be tied back to a country doesn't mean it's tied back to the government. And they're not even actually verifying whether that tie is even there. This is just really ridiculous.
Right, totally ridiculous. And then I point out here how the CISA and the FBI, CISA, of course, working with the CTI League, FBI, also, working with the ADL now, right? They're all recently put out warnings that Iran's going to hack us. You guys better be scared. Of course, none of this, I know you've talked about on the Daily Wrap Up a lot of times, Iran itself has been the subject of insane cyber attacks all year long, and that hasn't gotten much play in the media.
Open too. Weird. Like that's not even a secret. I think the New York Times even wrote about how they're talking about these things.
Israel's admitted that like most of those, if not all of them, were them in intelligence operations, which would have been done by Unit 8200, oddly enough. because that's what, offensive hacking operations
Right.
against nation states, right? Like Lior Div used to do, Cyber
And
Reasons.
there is no legal justification for this, no matter what they say. Even if you believe everything they're saying about Iran, that's still an illegal act.
Hey, but you can justify anything as long as you put national security as
Right.
a label on top of it. It absolves you of anything.
Or just scream you're fighting for freedom, apparently, and that just alleviates everything.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Anyway, as I point out here, so not only has Iran been targeted, and as you pointed out, Israel's essentially openly admitted that they've been involved in most of those, if not all of them. I point out here, I mean, just a really brief summary of the history. There's a lot more detail here if people are interested in looking into this, but top Israeli intelligence officials have attempted for years to goad the US into making the first move against Iran, both covertly and overtly. Here I talk about some Mossad stuff with Iran, but one important thing, you should go watch this interview that Mayor Dagan, when he was still alive, the former Mossad director of Mossad. At the time he gave this interview, he was chairman of the board of Black Cube, which we talked a little bit about yesterday. Anyway, Mayor Dagan, when he was Mossad director, he pushed the U.S. State Department to pursue covert measures and urged more attention on regime change in Iran while head of Mossad. And he said in 2012, he thinks the U.S. needs to strike Iran first so Israel doesn't have to. That's a 60 Minutes interview. You should really go and watch it because he's pretty blatant. He's like, well, we need to make it, it's not Israel's war. We need to make it an international war. And that means that the U.S. strikes first. I mean, that's a summary of what he says. Yeah, so international war is how they frame it. Pretty crazy. And here we go. So Israeli officials have been relatively candid about their role in several of the recent cyber attacks that have befallen Iran, as well as the fact that power elements of the Israeli state are right now trying to get the U.S. to join a conflict against Iran before the 2020 presidential election while Trump remains in power. But of course, Trump remains in power, as I pointed out earlier, until January 2021. So really, it doesn't have to be before the election. It could be on the election or slightly after the election, right? Yeah. Also, the effort has led to a concern among EU officials that Israel's government may be seeking to provoke an event whereby the US would engage Iran militarily. This is from MIMO, or no, this is from antiwar.com. And then this other one is the Business Insider report that you can see here,
right,
about how Israel is intentionally conducting cyber attacks and legit bombing things in Iran, trying to force a confrontation before Trump can be removed from office.
Imagine if that was reverse. Imagine if that was saying that Iran was bombing inside of Israel, there would be a war right now. Like, that is so incredibly hypocritical. And I want people to ask themselves too, what do you think Iran gains from this? Like, hypothetically, if you believe everything they're saying, there's no gain. There's no actual military or even societal gain in what they're trying to do that they claim. So what I want people to ask or think about it more appropriately is, all they've said in the past is that it's, oh, well, he's just a madman, right? Assad or whoever. Oh, he's a maniac. That's why he likes to gas children. There's no logic to any of this. And the moment you dig into it, you see that there is no motive there. And they're not maniacs like they try to paint them. So then you need to ask, what is the motivation? And if there's not a motivation, then ask, maybe
you know who's a maniac? Dick freaking Cheney. Did anything happen to him? No, he's still chilling. His daughter's in Congress, and he's just like, I am free to do whatever I want. I mean, so are all the other war criminals. I mean, those are the maniacs, dude. I mean, really, Dick Cheney, probably one of the most unhinged people probably ever. And, I don't know.
There's always a motive, right? And that's the end of the day. You see, they keep trying to make this about something like they're stealing this or doing that. There's no actual end game motive for what these countries or governments are trying, that they claim they're doing. They just want you to think they're maniacs. And that just doesn't make sense. That's all I want people to think about,
Right. So here really quick, I mean, I just point out how it's a huge conflict of interest to be citing Zadenberg and Clear Sky about anything. And the fact that they're running the CTI League, which is allowing all of these faceless volunteers that are vetted by Zadenberg himself or any of these other guys to like join and be on all these critical networks, right when we're being told our critical infrastructure is going to be hacked, and they're in bed with the very government agency that's tasked with protecting our critical infrastructure. Do you not see what's happening here, people? I mean, there's a reason we are busting ass to get this info out before the election, because do you see what this is? I mean, it should be pretty freaking blatant, honestly.
Absolutely.
Oh man. I mean, it's just like right there. Anyway, these are the other founders. One of the other founders is Mark Rogers, who began his career as a hacker and then became a hacktivist, an ethical hacker. Doesn't that sound like how Cyber Reason's hackers in the election simulations described themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, when he became an ethical hacker, he went to work for Vodafone and other multinational gigantic corporations. So I guess that's ethical hacking to this guy. So crazy. So anyway, he's currently the vice president of cybersecurity strategy at Okta, which is an enterprise identity solution platform. But it's co-founded by former Salesforce executives. By the way, Salesforce, you should go read Cory Morningstar's new expose. They are super involved with the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset people, and all of that stuff, the Salesforce people. And also one of the guys that co-founded the TIP is tied up with them too. Or Transition Integrity Project. They'll be in the next video. So, and Okta is also one of their main investors, if not their main investor, is this venture capital firm, Andreessen Horowitz, which backs some of Ehud Barak's companies, including Toka, which is basically allows governments and police to hack any device connected to the Internet of Things in the name of national security. And their main advisor is Larry Summers, the Jeffrey Epstein pal, former president of Harvard and former secretary of the Treasury under Bill Clinton. So fun company there. We'll be seeing Okta pop up a little bit later. Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to lighten the mood, I guess. I don't know. So the other two founders of CTI League are Microsoft guys, Nate Warfield and Chris Mills. Warfield is a former self-described gray hat hacker, meaning, there's white hats and there's black hats. He's like gray hat. I was in between. Anyway, here, the definition I pulled up for the article says, a hacker or cybersecurity professional who violates laws or common ethical standards, but without malicious intent.
So a mercenary, essentially, right? It's all just about the money, right? That's what that boils down to.
Well, I mean, I guess you could interpret it that way, but basically he breaks the law, but didn't mean to. That's essentially what that's saying. I was doing it for good. I didn't know that I was actually,
To be clear, though, not having malicious intent does not then imply good intentions, right? Like, as a mercenary doesn't have malicious intent. They just do it because they're paid, right?
Oh, good point. So anyway, Warfield now works as a senior program manager at Microsoft Security Response Center. And the other guy, Chris Mills, also works for Microsoft Security Response Center and previously created the U.S. Navy's Computer Forensics Lab while he was at the Navy's Cyber Defense Operations Command. So the Microsoft Security Response Center, or MSRC, proactively builds a collective defense working with industry and government security organizations to fend off cyber attacks, another public-private partnership. There's so many of those these days. Anyway, it also works with the Cyber Defense Operations Center and Microsoft's other cybersecurity teams, including those previously overseen by Chris Krebs when he was in charge of Microsoft's U.S. policy work on cybersecurity and technology issues. Krebs, as previously mentioned, is now head of the federal agency overseen by DHS called CISA that oversees the protection of critical electronic infrastructure in the U.S., including the voting system and the lead up to the election where Krebs himself says everything's going to be hacked. Okay, so in addition to the above, MSRC is also heavily focused on pursuing the cybersecurity needs of Microsoft customers, which includes the U.S. government and the Department of Defense. MSRC is directly affiliated with Microsoft's Election Guard, which we talked about yesterday. And as I mentioned before, the push for the adoption of Election Guard software in the US, largely spearheaded by the Chris Krebs-led CISA.
Perfect.
So, oh no, the people protecting, well, I'm sorry, I phrased that wrong. I was gonna make I'll just move on.
Well, I think don't forget out there that, there's the tie-in, I think, with Microsoft is so relevant for a lot of reasons, but Microsoft is clearly tied in from a lot of different angles. And Bill Gates absolutely still has influence over that company, right? That's not something we can pretend isn't there. That's relevant.
Right. No, absolutely. So what I was just going to reiterate how, we have the guy in the government leading the agency in charge of protecting election infrastructure. He issues warnings saying the election infrastructure is going to be hacked, but he's partnering with groups like CTI League right? And
Mm-hmm.
then they have a solution to, if a awful hack happens, the very solution he's been lobbying for to be put on voting machines nationwide, Microsoft's election guard. You know, I mean, it's basically like the easiest setup ever to have
Yeah.
that rammed through after some sort of catastrophic election infrastructure
And
event.
and just like you pointed out before, in every one of these cases, you have the actions. They're taking actions which set up the need for what they want to drive in. That a child could see that.
Right. I agree. Anyway, so this part is really important, which is why it's pretty much the article from in this section is all highlighted because it is really important. So Microsoft and the MSRC, specifically at Microsoft, have been at the center alongside Clear Sky over the past 2 years of claims linking Iran's government to recent hacking events and assertions that Iranian government-linked hackers will soon target the U.S. power grid and other critical infrastructure with cyber attacks. And a lot of this was in part 3 of my Cyber Reason series, which we didn't cover yesterday. It's going to be in the next video, but well, part of it anyway. Last year, for example, Microsoft penned a blog post about a quote threat group it referred to as Phosphorus, which is also sometimes referred to as Advanced Persistent Threat, or APT-35, or Charming Kitten, because they love these names, Fuzzy Bear and Charming Kitten. You know, those groups never call themselves that. That's like the name these professional cybersecurity professionals give to them. Anyway, Microsoft claimed in that blog post that they believe the group originates from Iran and is linked to the Iranian government, but did not provide more details as to why they hold that belief, despite the implications of the claim, just like Clear Sky, right? So they went on to assert that this Iranian Phosphorus group attempted to target a U.S. presidential campaign. Remember that story?
Mm-hmm.
Which subsequent media reports revealed was President Trump's re-election campaign. Microsoft concluded the attempt was not technically sophisticated and was ultimately unsuccessful, but the company felt compelled not only to disclose the event, but attempt to link it to Iran's government. Remember, they didn't provide any evidence as to why. They just said, we believe. It's our belief. But we won't tell you why we believe that.
And when you shared this, we know that's happening again already, right? Are we saving that for later on, or should I show it right now? Because that's something that seems relevant to what you're talking about.
Oh, which story is it?
In the Republican Party, you're saying hackers are already targeting Trump's reelection campaign again now.
Sure, if you want to pull it up, go for
Yeah,
it.
I believe you sent this to me. So this was the one that's happening right now. You know, that's Wisconsin Republican Party says hackers targeted and stole over 2.3 million from an account dedicated to President Trump's reelection. But what's funny about that, and there's already insinuations of Iranian ties and so on, that there was already the example that you and I laughed at right when this started, that, oh, Iran's trying to help Trump's campaign. It's like, what? That doesn't even make sense. But it doesn't even matter. It's just kind of like Iran, just throw it in there somehow, you know? And so this is the opposite side of it. Now they're hurting his campaign, but it's still Iran somehow. It just doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. They just want you to think that Iran's targeting us constantly and, you know, be afraid.
Right.
Oh man. Anyway, so this story gets even crazier. So it's worth pointing out that the only presidential campaign, because using Microsoft's Account Guard software, which is part of Microsoft's Defending Democracy program, where NewsGuard comes from, remember them? And Election Guard come from? Yeah, Trump was the one using that. So Microsoft's, you know, Defending Democracy program was protecting the emails that were hacked by Iran. Okay.
If you haven't read those articles, I'll try to remember to include those. The ones Whitney wrote about these, just dismantle these companies. It's a joke, but I need to remember to include those because these companies are absurd.
Anyone that thinks Microsoft cares about defending democracy, I recommend you go back and you look at how Bill Gates ran that company and how he even got sued by the government over antitrust stuff because of how ruthlessly he built a monopoly. And you think that guy cares about your democratic freedoms, dude?
Yeah, it was a way to censor dissenting opinions, and we saw that already, and now we're just having new variations of it today.
Yeah, well, NewsGuard is out of control. They're a story for another day, but if you go to this article, you can find my link to my NewsGuard article in there, which was also originally published at Mint Press News. You can search on their site for it too. Anyway, so though it provided no evidence for the hack even taking place, or its reasons for believing that the attack originated from Iran, media reports treated Microsoft's declaration as proof that Iran had begun actively meddling in the 2020 presidential election. Remember that since then, we talked about this the other day, that Google came out and said Iranian disinformation campaign, but had like no evidence either. It was like very similar to this Microsoft one. Anyway, the headlines based on Microsoft's belief it was Iran, but there's no proof. Here are some examples. Iranian hackers target Trump campaign as 2020 threats mount. Iran-linked hackers target Trump 2020 campaign, Microsoft says. Microsoft, Iran government-linked hacker targeted 2020 presidential campaign. By the way, they just say they believe it originated from Iran. The government link, oh man, these people are reaching hard, and it
Totally.
shows. Anyway, Microsoft says Iranians tried to hack U.S. presidential campaign.
At least that says, like, I mean, constantly they're attacking alternative media, independent media for even for more sound arguments than that, you know, and it's just it's such hypocritical writing. It really is bad. And you ask yourself how these people justify that in their minds, because this is basic stuff. I mean, you could clearly see that this one source is just, you know, who has a couple of anonymous people along with him, is not a valid source to be pushing something that has this much effect on policy. Like, people's lives are at stake, and they must know that, you know. So you wonder who's driving this.
Right. So here's the kicker. Phosphorus, this Iranian linked group that they won't say how it's linked to Iran, is the same group that Clear Sky and Zadenberg keep talking about. But
Shocking.
They refer to it as a different name, but it's the same, the Charming Kitten. So Zadenberg calls it Charming Kitten. Microsoft calls it Phosphorus, but if you read the fine print, it's the same group, but by using those two different names and getting cited in all these different media reports, it creates the appearance that there's multiple Iranian hacker groups that they're accusing of stuff, but it's really one group. And isn't it weird that you say the same people accusing them, Microsoft and Zadenberg, creating the CTI League together? I don't know. Maybe it's them. That's too conspiratorial, right?
Maybe they planned this out. Uh-oh, that's not possible, right? It's just incredible.
Oh, man. Yeah, so anyway, I conclude that paragraph with, it certainly is interesting that the 4 founding members of CTI League share ties to the same military intelligence agencies and associated corporations, as well as an interest in the exact same group of alleged Iranian hackers. That is so weird.
What a coincidence.
Anyway, just to wrap up here. So remember earlier I said CTI League has a focus on disinformation. Well, it turns out all their other members are anonymous, right? But from this lady's LinkedIn, it mentions her being in the CTI League as their disinformation specialist, Sarah Jane Terp, a former computer scientist for the UK military and the United Nations. But she currently works at something called the Credibility Coalition. Don't they sound nice? They describe themselves as an effort to address online misinformation by defining factors that communicate information reliability to readers. It's funded by Google and Facebook. And also Craig Newmark Philanthropies, Craig Newmark is the guy behind Craigslist. He's a billionaire, and he has been pouring his money into tons of anti-fake news initiatives, and we'll see him again in a little bit. And also the Knight Foundation, a major backer of the Microsoft affiliated NewsGuard. The Trust Project was basically Craig Newmark and Pierre Omidyar. Pierre Omidyar, by the way, helped set up the ADL Hate Lab, and I'm pretty sure Craig Newmark gave them money as well. And I think that's it for the CTI League, yeah. So this article is really important, has a lot more information. Follow the links and check these people out. This is no coincidence, really, that they're setting this up. And speaking of Iran, another example of awful reporting that really needs to be covered. 13 hours ago, from when we're recording this video, Pentagon leaders targeted by potential threats linked to killing of Iranian General Soleimani. Soleimani was killed in January. They want us to believe they waited until almost November to get mad about it. That makes sense.
Well, I would argue that there has been an argument even from the beginning, and even from people that are, I guess, pro-Iranian, if you want to state it like that, that it made the argument that Iran has the level head kind of mentality and would intentionally wait until there was, you know, and so on and so on. But and that's probably why they're pushing that. But nonetheless, it really doesn't make sense, seeing as how they have already responded. That's what I think is, you know, their open attacks based on what the U.S. government did, right? That's what I think doesn't make sense about it.
Well, I'll humor that, but take a look at these threats and what they're really saying, and keep in mind the timing of Iran's going to hack the hospitals and infrastructure and all this stuff, okay? So it was first reported by NBC News on Thursday and verified by Fox, okay, that the threats could be linked to the killing of Soleimani. They don't actually know, okay? The names of the Pentagon officials allegedly targeted were not released, but they're believed to have been the senior leadership involved in the Soleimani killing. By the way, Israel basically was behind, well, largely involved in prompting the U.S. to kill Soleimani. If you're not familiar with that, I recommend and go look it up. It didn't come out right after the Soleimani killing, but by February, they essentially admitted they were involved.
Yeah, and we covered this extensively. I'll try to remember to include some videos about, what this really was. And this was a diplomatic mission that people were invited on. The Iraqi government already admitted this, and so on.
Right.
And this was an extrajudicial assassination. That's what it was.
So anyway, they're citing here for all this information a person familiar with the threats. They don't tell you who they are, so totally anonymous. Saying concerns of Iran harming American officials extend to civilian officials as well. A person familiar, anonymous person familiar with the threats. I mean, this is just like before the invasion with Iraq. I hope people remember. I mean, I know it was a long time ago, but like it's the same crap. Anyway. So the incident about the threats is based on this incident that reportedly involved a senior Pentagon official followed by an Iranian national, okay? All of this whole article comes from this incident. So what was the incident? This Pentagon official, who asked not to be identified for security reasons, we don't know who he is, okay, was followed after getting into a black government-owned SUV. The driver of the tail, later identified as an Iranian national driving a car with Virginia plates, followed them for 5 to 7 miles, reportedly driving aggressively at times, but they easily lost him after changing routes. And the Pentagon issued a be on the lookout alert, or a BOLO, and informed federal law enforcement authorities of the incident, releasing details of the Iranian national's Facebook and Instagram accounts, which shows he had friends in Iran and Afghanistan, that bad man.
Yeah.
Friends in Iran and the country that borders it. He clearly is... why did they include that,
They're insinuating that Iranian people are bad, that Afghanistan, despite them trying to always pretend that they're fighting for the people, everything they do hurts the people. That's the idea, that they try to pretend like just because he's from Iran that he's suspect. It's the same thing they do about Russia. And that's so incredible that they're issuing this based on, it just bothers me.
Them, but no one knows if he was just driving the same way they were.
He could, the fact that, we lost him after, a one term, maybe he wasn't even following them. It's totally hypothetical because a guy's wrong. Go ahead.
Check this out, though. Pentagon and FBI officials disagree on whether the event even constitutes an actual attempt to target a senior Pentagon official.
Good
so
Lord.
These guys don't even think it's, it's just this one guy being like, time to seed something in the mainstream media that Iran is going after our leaders, and there might be a war with Iran soon.
With this kind of stretch in what happened, with this kind of stretch, you really start wondering whether this event even took place. Like if people on their team are going, that's not something, and they're pushing it out anyway. What's to tell us this even real? There's just so much aggressive misinformation. And remember, we've talked about many times the Smith Modernization Act.
This article is misinformation. Why doesn't CTI League target them? Oh, wait, they're promoting the war with Iran that they want.
Well, that's what I was saying is Smith Modernization Act, for those who don't remember, right? This made it legal for our government to do this if they say national security. They can literally lie and make fake news if they argue it's for your safety or whatever, right? And that's what this could be.
So here it is again. The FBI investigated the event and found no relation between the Iranian national and the Iranian government. No link, the FBI even says it, or any reason to suspect it was part of a larger securry concern.
So why even write this article? That's just
because of all the stuff they're seeding. So we know why, but it's this is clownish, but dangerous. And then they add this at the end. Remember this tweet from Trump?
Mm-hmm.
Press, who by the way is funded by people like Sheldon Adelson, who are on camera talking about nuking Iran. Okay, so according to press reports, Iran may be planning an assassination or other attack against the United States for Soleimani. Right, so I mean, they're trying to tie something together here, and this report originated from NBC. I just looked at this report, but it's worth pointing out that NBC employs Ken Delanian, who was
Mm-hmm.
fired from the Los Angeles Times for, letting the CIA write his reports for him. I wonder if he's the writer. I don't actually know, but I almost suspect that it's him.
Just so we're clear, by the way, for those that don't know that,
No,
that's
it's
not
not.
hyperbole, right? That's a fact, right? This is
Yeah.
the idea that, and that's not just one off, right? We know that there are other examples like this where intelligence entities are essentially writing articles for journalists or journalists.